Donahue, the city manager. I'm going to open this up. We do expect the mayor momentarily, but we'll get started with some of the introductions here tonight. Welcome to this broadcast, Your Lowell, Your Vote. This is tonight, we are delighted to have a panel discussion regarding the systems that will be on the ballot in connection with the two election system options on November 5th. We are very fortunate to have experts with us tonight, and I would like to begin introducing our panelists, starting, however, with our moderator. Tonight we are joined by Lisa Handley. Lisa is a PhD and a leading expert in voter data analysis and voting patterns, and has published widely in this area. She has advised numerous jurisdictions, both domestically and internationally, on electoral systems and surrounding challenges. Her clients include the U.S. Department of Justice, multiple state and local jurisdictions, and redistricting commissions. She is currently president of Maryland-based Frontier International Electoral Consulting. So welcome, Lisa, tonight. We also are joined by panelists. First, let me introduce Howard Fain. Howard is the Deputy Director of Policy and Research with Voter Choice Massachusetts, a nonprofit organization that advocates for the expanded use of ranked choice voting. Mr. Fain has been with Voter Choice Mass since its founding in 2016. He was previously co-founder of Fair Vote and served on its board of directors between 1922 and 1992. You didn't look that old. 1992 and 1998. Mr. Fain is a proponent of the ranked choice voting electoral system. Welcome, Mr. Fain. Next, we are joined by Tanya Ford. Tanya is the Executive Director of the Cambridge Election Commission for the City of Cambridge. Ms. Ford has been with the City of Cambridge for 9 years. She was previously Deputy Village Clerk and Village Clerk in Hempstead, New York for approximately 11 years, where she was also responsible for conducting elections. Cambridge electoral system is ranked choice voting. Welcome. Our next panelist is one that many of you may know, Michael Gallagher, who is joining us. Michael is an attorney here in the city of Lowell and a founding partner of Gallagher and Kavanaugh LLP. This is a Lowell-based law firm. He has received numerous accolades for the practice of law. He has also previously served on the Lowell School Committee and on the boards of multiple local committees and organizations. He has recently been recognized as a community leader who is a proponent of the hybrid mixture of both at-large and district seat electoral systems. So please welcome Attorney Michael Gallagher. And last but not least, we are joined tonight by Nico Vangeli, the Assistant City Clerk for the City of Worcester. Am I saying that correctly? Administrator in June 2014. As the Assistant City Clerk, he provides operational and administrative support to the Board of Election Commissioners and is the primary election and voter registration official. Worcester's electoral system is a hybrid mixture of at-large and district seats. Welcome, Mr. Vangeli. And before I turn this over to the law department to give an explanation of the process here tonight, I do want to introduce some of the city councilors and elected officials who are with us. We'll bring the mayor up to give greetings. But first, let me introduce City Councilor Dave Conway. City Councilor Jim Milanazzo. Register of Deeds, Richard Howe, Jr. I hope I didn't miss anybody. So now I'd like to ask Mayor Bill Samaras to join us up here to give greetings tonight before we begin the panel discussion. Please welcome Mayor Bill Samaras.
We've got to do something about the traffic. No, thank you. I'm glad for this opportunity because this is important. Lowell's on the verge of some change, okay? And what is this change? It's about the voting rights situation. There was a charge that the system should change. It was much discussed. It was mediated well, and we came up with some options. And I think that's what's good about the plan that we have. It's not something where we made a settlement and we came back and said to the city, this is the settlement. We sat down with the federal judge and the litigants and the city solicitor's office, and I think we hammered out, some pretty good options. So tonight, what you have is a panel that's going to give you good information on ranked choice voting, which is Cambridge, or something similar to what Cambridge has, in a hybrid situation with the 3 at large and 8 districts, much like Worcester. These are communities that have been very successful in getting out their vote and also making sure that all people in the community feel that they have an option to vote. And if they vote, they have a chance of being able to put in a candidate of their choice, whether it's someone of their political belief or someone of their social economic background or cultural or ethnic background. It opens so many doors, and what this does, basically, I like the term, it opens doors to everyone. So I want to thank the panel for being here tonight to give a good explanation of what the process is. I'm sure we're going to learn quite a bit. I want to thank you for taking time out, and I know many of you have a very busy schedule, and to be here tonight, it's important. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now I would like to invite the Law Department. I don't know whether Attorney Christine O'Connor or Rachel Brown or both will just explain to the audience tonight the process here tonight and how this panel discussion will proceed. So, who got the shortest straw? Our City Solicitor, Christine O'Connor.
Thank you. We wanted to point out that this evening there are 2 translators here, and one is Laf Vezudoban, and maybe you could just stand up, make your, and then also Courtney Korn. Hopefully I did okay on those. And thanks very much for being here tonight. As far as the form of tonight's presentation, you'll be having some PowerPoints from the panelists, and it will encompass roughly about an hour in time. These PowerPoints will be a presentation. They'll be also available in translated form, and there'll also be a Q&A period for our panelists, moderated by Lisa, which will be about an hour in length. So with that.
My task is to tell you how we got where we are now and why we're going to be choosing a new system for Lowell. So a voting rights suit was filed in, I thought, okay, does it need to be, now do we have it better? Okay, all right. A voting rights suit was filed by Asian Americans and Hispanics in May of 2017, contending that the at-large system that you have in place now diluted minority votes in violation of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act is a federal act. It was passed in 1965. All right. This is typical of me. My voice is soft, unless I'm yelling at my children. Okay, so the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965 and amended several times since then, prohibits racial discrimination in voting. It prohibits any procedure or system that denies or abridges the right to vote based on race, color, or language. It prohibits two kinds of discrimination. One is vote denial, and the other is vote dilution. Vote denial is not allowing someone to cast a vote. When this was passed in 1965, you had a situation in the South where African Americans could not even go and cast a vote. But it's since broadened, and now it encompasses vote dilution as well. And in fact, most voting rights cases, most Section 2 voting right cases now are vote dilution cases. And these are cases in which minorities are able to go and actually cast a vote, but voting strength is diluted either because you have an at-large system or because you've drawn a districting plan that fragments the minority community. An at-large system dilutes minority votes when you have a majority. In an at-large system, 50% of the 50% plus one of the voters can elect all of the seats. So if you have a majority who's consistently electing their choice, even if you're 45% or even 49% of the population, you're not able to elect your candidates of choice so long as the 50% plus one is selecting other candidates. So, already changed it, okay. So the Voting Rights Act was amended in 1982 to make it clear that you didn't have to have an intent to discriminate. The system merely had to result in discrimination. So for example, the at-large system here in Lowell was put into place before there was a minority population. The intent was not to discriminate when it was put into place in 1957. I think the minority community was too small to even think about intentionally discriminating. However, the result is that minorities were not being able to elect their candidates of choice. So when it was amended, there was a Supreme Court case a few years later that actually laid out what plaintiffs had to prove in order to show that the system was dilutive. And there were 3 prongs to this test. The first was that you had to have a remedy. There had to be a way to remedy this. So the minority community had to be large enough and sufficiently compact that you could draw a district in which they would make up a majority. And as the court cases evolved, it turns out, for example, if you have a lot of non-citizens, you have to be able to make up 50% of the citizen voting age population in a single member district. So that's the first prong. The second prong is that the minority community has to be cohesive. They have to have shared interests, or it doesn't make sense to draw districts for them anyway. And the third is that the majority has to vote as a bloc to usually defeat the minority preferred candidates. And if these 3 conditions are in place, then the chances are the jurisdiction that's being sued will lose. In this particular case, it happens to be the case that you can draw at least 2 majority-minority districts, 2 districts in which Hispanics and Asian Americans make up 50% of the citizen voting age population. Furthermore, it turns out that voting is polarized, and by that we mean that minorities are cohesive in support of their preferred candidates, and that the majority typically chooses other candidates so that the minority preferred candidates are defeated. Because these conditions were in place, the Lowell City Council made a decision not to go to court, which would have cost the jurisdiction. Well, I was involved in litigation in Port Chester, and the lawyers' bills alone came over $1 million. Given that the 3 prongs were met, the decision was made to actually change the system without having to go to court. The consent decree was mediated by a judge, and the consent decree said that the dilutive at-large system could be replaced by one of 4 possibilities that would then be culled down to 2 possibilities. And The City Council has now narrowed that down to 2 possibilities, and the panelists today will discuss these 2 possibilities so that you can cast an informed vote about this. I want to take a couple seconds to talk about my experience in a few other jurisdictions that face precisely this question and how they went about solving it. The first is Jones County, North Carolina. This is a small county in North Carolina on the East Coast, a population of about 10,000. They had a 5-member city council, county commission. And despite the fact that the county was over a third black in population, they had not elected an African American to the council, despite several running and getting support from at least the African American voters. They also decided, because they did the analysis and the plaintiffs also did the analysis, that the 3 prongs of Jingles were met, and they decided again, in mediation with a federal judge, to change the system. What they did was they decided to draw districts. So they have a pure districted system. They actually increased the number of the council from 5. I'm sorry. Okay. They moved from 5 commissioners to 7 and drew 7 districts. And in the first election that they had after that, in 2018, they elected for the first time 2 African American commissioners. So they have a 7-member county commission with 2 African Americans. Although districts are the usual choice of jurisdictions facing voting rights case, they're not the only choice. The most common choice is something called cumulative or limited voting. I think you'll be the first to adopt ranked choice voting in the conditions that you'll be adopting it if you choose to do this as a result of voting rights litigation. Anyway, the village of Port Chester was sued by the U.S. Department of Justice in 2006. It had an at-large board of trustees. The jurisdiction was about 50% Hispanic and had never elected Hispanic. None of the 6 commissioners had ever been Hispanic before. The Justice Department won the case. The 3 prongs were there. The city probably should have settled, but they spent $1 million and lost it. And they decided that they didn't actually want to move to districts. And they retained the at-large system, but they introduced something called cumulative voting. In a cumulative voting system, what you have is there were 6 trustees, and each voter had 6 votes, but instead of spreading them out, they could cumulate them on a single candidate if they wanted. They could spread them out 3 and 3 across 2 candidates. They could spread them out across individual candidates as if the system were the same as it used to be. But this allowed minorities to actually accumulate their votes on their 1 or 2 choices that they wanted to see elected, and in fact, it was successful. In the first election after adopting this system, they elected Hispanic, and they continued to elect Hispanic and ultimately an African American as well in Port Chester. My last example is the city of Euclid, Ohio, and this is an instance in which actually retaining the at-large system and putting into place an alternative voting system didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is because 2 things have to happen for an alternative voting system to work. That is retaining the at-large system and putting into place cumulative, limited, or ranked choice voting. And that is minorities have to turn out, and they have to be very cohesive. And what happened in Euclid is that black voters didn't turn out. Now, we knew this going in, and the Justice Department was adamantly opposed to putting into place an alternative system. And nonetheless, that was the system that was adopted, and in the 2 elections, the two subsequent elections, no African Americans were elected. However, now, as the population increased, the black population of Euclid increased, and black turnout increased, you now have a school board with 5 members, 2 of whom are African American in a city that is about 55% African American. So those are three different options that 3 different jurisdictions, all of which were sued, opted to. The systems they opted to introduce all succeeded, at least eventually, in giving minorities an opportunity to actually elect their candidates of choice. They had not been elected previously. You have 2 options in front of you here that both are going to, that the plaintiffs have agreed, and scholars also, voting rights advocates also agree, are likely to give minorities an opportunity to elect their candidates of choice. The first one is the hybrid electoral system, in which you would have 8 geographic districts, and then you would have 3 people elected at large, and this would be for the city council. And then you would have the 2 of the districts combined to create 4 seats. That would be 4 districts that would each elect 1 for the school board, and then elect 2 at large as well. The way that this would allow minorities to elect their candidates of choice is the consent decree establishes that 2 of these districts have to be minority in composition. So there will be 2 districts in which, if minorities turn out and cast votes, they will be a majority of the voters and be able to elect their candidates of choice. One of the disadvantages of the system is the minority group has to be large enough and geographically compact enough to make a majority of the district. So, for example, African Americans, there's a much smaller population here, couldn't have a district of their own because the population simply isn't sufficiently large. Another disadvantage of the system is that only minorities within those districts have an opportunity to elect their candidates of choice. Minorities that reside in other districts would not. A ranked choice voting system I'm going to leave up to the experts to describe to you, but as I mentioned before, this hasn't been introduced in the as a remedy in a voting rights case, although it could have been. It's not very common to people in much of the world. However, it is used here in Cambridge, and it was used in Lowell. So you actually have a history with this. It's also used out in California. It's used in Minneapolis. So it is used in places, these places that have adopted it, haven't adopted it under the auspices of a voting rights challenge, but it could solve the problem. It keeps the at-large portion of the election in place, so you don't have to draw districts. But it allows minorities an opportunity to elect their candidates if they're voting cohesively and strategically, and they rank their candidates of choice very high, then their chances of electing a candidate of choice are high. The disadvantage to an at-large system, if you're a minority candidate, is that it's harder to run at large. It takes more money to run citywide than it would within a district, and that tends to impact minority candidates more than it impacts other candidates. So what you're going to face on the ballot is an option between the 2. So option 1 is the hybrid system, and option 2 is nope, got that wrong. Option 1 is the ranked choice, and option 2 is the hybrid system. And this is going to be described to you in much greater length, but the point is you should choose one of them. If you vote yes on both of them, you've just canceled out your vote. The same if you vote no on both of them. So you're going to vote yes on one and no on the other. And these guys are going to describe to you these systems to help you decide which way you want to vote. And I'm going to turn it over to Howard now to talk about ranked choice voting.
Thank you. Can you hear me? As you can see on the screen, as the consent decree identified this system as the proportional representation system, it was it's how it's known in Cambridge. It's how it was used at the time that Lowell was using the system, so I have it there. And I want to thank the mayor especially for the remarks, because electing someone of choice and opening doors is exactly the theme we'll be talking about tonight. And I'm going to be describing the system and making some important clarifications about districts as well. So change is needed. As most in this room probably agree, both options are better than the current system. And this lawsuit is about representation, not districts per se. Tonight I will describe how representation actually happens under both options with hard numbers. Proportional representation, or PR, is about properly representing communities of voters with shared interest, as they and they alone define them. It's about winning seats in proportion to votes won, not to percentage of population, though PR generally ends up pretty darn close to that as well. Under PR, voters essentially create their own districts by joining their vote with other like-minded voters from anywhere in the city. How does PR provide different communities a fair chance at representation? Because in a citywide PR election, every voter will get just one vote, not 9. Instead of the minimum of 4,000 to 4,500 votes needed to win an at-large seat in Lowell today, a successful candidate under PR will need only about 1,100 to 1,200 votes. That's the threshold for election from any voter in the city, and that's based on current turnout. Reaching that number in a citywide PR election is different than campaigning in an at-large election. It costs less per capita to win a PR seat than in comparable cities with hybrid systems, precisely because a successful campaign can reach out to members of a community bound by neighborhood, by race or other identity, by economic status, by policy issues, or any combination. Having one vote, not 9, is critical. So why the rankings? To make sure each vote is an effective one. You can't waste your vote on a candidate who has more than enough votes to win one seat or one who has not enough. Expect about 77% of voters will see their first choice for city council elected. 77%. A whopping 92% will see one of their top 2 choices elected. Almost every voter goes to the polls expecting to actually elect someone they favor over others. The PR rankings also eliminate the need for low turnout, expensive preliminary elections by automatically protecting against wasted or split votes. 89 voting rights lawsuits in the U.S. have been successfully settled with the modified at-large systems that Dr. Henley just spoke about, such as cumulative or limited voting, instead of district or hybrid systems. Such systems do avoid the expense and challenges of drawing district lines, while still facilitating minority representation. Some who brought in these systems believe that proportional representation is actually the best alternative to at-large voting. So why is PR on the table in Lowell, but not elsewhere? Because Lowell used PR in the past. Because Lowell knows PR worked. It diversified representation, which enriched and improved city government. And sadly, because Lowell also knows that PR's very success here led to its downfall after 14 good years, as the empire struck back, in a way, real hard. PR is un-American, they said. A candidate supported by voters from the same shared community must be flaunting their of cohesive voting patterns. Ethnicity and race have always been a factor in Lowell, no matter the election system. The difference is who gets represented and who does not. I've studied results from Lowell's PR elections held between 1943 and 1957, and those from other Massachusetts cities using PR past and present. The results in diversity of people, neighborhoods, and political perspectives of the time are always similar. I should add, if the 2009 vote in Lowell to bring back PR had been approved, this lawsuit would never have happened, and the city would be 10 years into a more inclusive democracy. Right before Lowell replaced it with PR, the city actually used a hybrid system. The council was made up of 4 at-large seats and 11 district seats, which were composed of the 11 wards, in partisan elections. If proportional representation opened doors for some in Lowell that had previously been shut, then those doors must have been shut under that earlier hybrid system. They were. One group may be concentrated in a district, but another may be even more concentrated within those same district borders. Someone's district win is therefore someone else's district loss. That's true in lopsided or unopposed races, of which there were many during that time. It's also true when the winning margin is just 2 votes, as happened in the Ward 4 election in 1941, the last before PR. That's why drawing lines, district lines, even by the independent expert hired to do that, worries many of Lowell today, many in Lowell today, especially since there are 2 different named plaintiff groups and others not named. The groups vary in degrees of geographic concentration, but even that constantly changes, as always happens in the life cycle of all American cities. Much has been made about Boston, Worcester, and Springfield, the 3 largest cities in Massachusetts, having adopted hybrid systems. Boston, 9 districts, 4 at large, 13 total. There were 2 safe minority districts when the system began in 1983. It wasn't until 2017, 34 years later, that a person of color won in a 3rd district out of the 9. By that time, communities of color constituted over 6% of Boston's population. In 34 years, candidates of color have won just 21.8% of all available council seats under this hybrid system, significantly underrepresented the whole time. Springfield, 8 districts, 5 at large, 13 total, in place only since 2009. In those 5 elections, people of color have won 43% of seats compared to a population of over 67%. Worcester, 5 districts, 6 at large, 11 total, since 1987. It wasn't until 2011, 24 years later, that a person of color won 1 of the district seats. The city's minority population had climbed past 40% by then. Overall, people of color have won just 6.3% of all available council seats in Worcester's hybrid system, significantly underrepresented the entire time. So let's get back to Lowell. The only slides I have tonight are maps, because maps tell stories. And by the way, my source of information is the archives of the Lowell Sun. The 14 years of proportional representation elections cannot be found in City Hall anywhere. They're just not there. So all of the addresses, everything else comes as all from the Lowell Sun archives. So consider this typical Lowell City Council election in 1951, midway through the PR years. The map highlights the diversity of neighborhoods and ethnic communities. What it doesn't show is the other features of PR elections, community and issue coalitions that both support and reach across those lines. But before those council stories, I'm just going to very quickly show the school committee, and I'm sure it's not showing up that strong, but from the same year, 1951, to see the similarities and the geographic diversity, and then return now to back to the city council. The reporting from the time did cover these stories. A page 1 headline in 1945 announced, first-time Greek, Polish Americans have held elective office here. Page 1, each day of the hand count used then, the newspaper dramatically detailed the impact of transfers from eliminated candidates. So about neighborhoods. Over the course of the PR elections, with just 9 seats to fill each time, candidates were elected from all 11 wards multiple times. Remember, there are only 9 seats. People represented the 11 wards multiple times. And I had this interesting thought, and I just spoke to Mr. Gallagher about this. When I read Mr. Gallagher's question in the public letter that was published, when's the last time South Lowell had a counselor? How about the acre? What I thought was, the answer is, besides what has happened since, during PR for sure. Neighborhood representation under PR was not a matter of chance. There's a great mock ballot in the Sun used to demonstrate rankings that they use neighborhoods named for candidates, such as Michael Aker, Cyril Belvedere, and Elmer Highlands. PR and neighborhood representation have always fit together like hand in glove. There is also a consistent spectrum from election to election, with some successful candidates having very concentrated support in just a few precincts, in a small number of precincts, and others being much more balanced citywide, according to all their first choice votes, with all points in between this spectrum for the other candidates. So looking at this map, no, we're still on, yes. And the names are a little hard to read with the lights on. But, so the most precinct concentrated winning candidates in this election were Roy and Beaudry. They're both, well, hope you can see them. Which was in fact typical for French candidates in all PR elections in Lowell, especially precincts in wards 6 and 7. Beaudry bumped out incumbent Ayat in this race. Neither of those two lived in those 2 wards. There were a total of 9 French candidates. The ranking and transfer process prevented vote splitting among them. Overall, 56% of transfers went from one French candidate to another. The rest, however, was split among the other communities. And this is a major difference between the cumulative, the modified at-large systems, cumulative and limited, that we heard about. There is no need for strategizing, no need for plumping all your votes on one minority candidate. It's free and open competition, and people being heard and a chance to vote without a negative effect on electing somebody from your community of interest. So these results show over 56% of transfers went from one French candidate to another. The rest, however, were split among other communities. So if you're looking for evidence of cohesion, it's easy to find. If you're looking for extreme polarization, it's not. A news account explains that one group of eliminations of candidates towards the bottom were chiefly those with Republican and French Republican backgrounds, which explains the excellent transfer strength being picked up by such candidates as Roy, Beaudry, Ayat, and Chouinard. Next most concentrated candidate, up the right, was Janus, but this incumbent Polish candidate from Centreville kept becoming less concentrated, more citywide in his support in first choice votes with each successive election he ran in. This description illustrates how ethnicity and neighborhood are interwoven in PR. When Horror, an Irish candidate, was eliminated with 1,189 votes, 159 went to Janus, his Centreville neighbor. They've actually lived in the same precinct. Of all the Irish candidates still in contention, only one pulled more transfers from Horror's votes, just 5 more. That was Pollard. Next, Kantakos. He and Sampson, his, quote, bitter rival in the Greek community, were in a storybook struggle to fill the last spot, neck and neck from the start, both seeking to succeed outgoing Greek incumbent and Mayor Eliades, both racking up a lot of support in Ward 2, Precinct 2, where Kantakos lived, and 7-2. Sampson didn't live in either ward. Quote from the paper, if Kantakos stays in front of Sampson, then his chances of winning will rest directly on the number of votes he receives from Sampson when the latter's votes are transferred according to their second choices. Kantakos will need at least 800 votes from the Sampson transfers to remain in contention. Well, Kantakos won the seat. Note that these 2 Greek candidates began with a combined total of first choice votes just 107 short of the winning threshold. On the spectrum of geographic concentration, the Irish candidates, Pollard, Dukeshire, Gallery, and McMahon, filled out 4 of the 5 most balanced citywide winners. The competition among 12 Irish candidates, 12, did not interfere with the traditional 4 seats the Irish had held since the first PR election in 1943. But because PR offers more choices to voters without any risk to the overall community, it did result in the defeat of 2 Irish challengers, defeat of 2 Irish incumbents in this election at the hands of Irish challengers. Neighborhood realignments appear to have played a role. The Irish had a 61% rate of transfers within community, the highest. Morris, as was described at the time, a Yankee, narrowly edged out longtime incumbent Hockmeyer. Both candidates were mid-range in terms of neighborhood versus citywide support, but did live in different areas, Hockmeyer over in Belvedere. Newspaper accounts made clear how issues in politics played out in ways that crossed both ethnic and neighborhood lines. Headlines addressed how anti or pro city manager blocks fared in a given election, which political party did better in these officially nonpartisan elections, and how the voters felt about city employee benefits emerged as issues in some elections, and were tallied in terms of the proportional representation results. In the first PR election, turnout exceeded expectations by more than 4,000, despite, as the Sun described it, the drenching rain. Turnout rose quickly and averaged 36,500 voters for the remaining 7 PR elections. Though we all hope for better and more consistent turnout in city elections, some are concerned that turnout disparities might mean more of the same, even under PR. That's not what happened last time when there were also turnout disparities, and projections using current numbers show that the single vote and the way, the transferability, that will not happen in Lowell. Yes, PR is responsive to voter turnout, but what people are worried about, if they are, of certain low turnout precincts and areas and communities being left out, and that will not happen. I have lots of information on that we'll be able to share. All these measures of success in Lowell's PR elections match up with results from other PR cities, past and present. Which brings us to Cambridge, the other city among the 5 largest, that includes Lowell and Cambridge and the 3 I mentioned before. Cambridge with a minority population of 35.9%. It has used PR to elect 9 city councilors and 6 school committee members for 78 years. Since 1963, when the minority population was just 5.3%, and the first African American councilor was elected, representation by people of color on both the council and the school committee has generally tracked the rise in their population rates. Sometimes just below, many more times just above, but it has tracked minority population rates the entire time since 1963. And just as importantly, that representation has also diversified as the city's minority population has itself diversified. I'm pleased to say tonight that Professor Moon Duchin, who partners with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the plaintiff's attorneys in this case, and whose pioneering geometry-based work on districting and gerrymandering has shifted the national debate, has announced that her team will issue a report analyzing the Lowell options. And I believe it's posted on their site, and they are looking to issue this report by October 21st. You can find out more information at District R, one word, District R without an E, districtr.org/Lowell. And speaking of District R, it includes their site, a totally cool draw your own districts tool. And I urge you to go home and play with it at that site, and where they announce they'll be analyzing the results with thousands of variations. That's typically what they do. And you could see some random district things. But I've used District R, and I had a slightly different aim in mind use. So can we click? Oh, no, go the other. Yeah. Just what you all know, the neighborhoods of Lowell. And we hear a lot about neighborhoods which are essential to this whole debate and need to be heard from. But I want to just show you what I did on this tool. Next one, please. As best I could do artistically, as carefully as I could, I played out those existing neighborhoods on the district tool, not to say these should be the districts, but to explain the problem about how when you go to draw district lines, and they have to be equal population. Next slide, please. So over there you can see the populations are wildly unbalanced, which would indicate that the neighborhoods as we know them with these current borders cannot be used as the districts. They will be the base of many districts, but when you play with this tool, just and form your own, keep this in mind. The next slide will just show you there's a population evaluation tab on the right also, and that will tell you all the important legal requirements, well, what the population numbers are, and as you draw your districts, you can see that. So, the next thing I'll just want to wrap up with is if during questions, I hope we'll be able to talk about some of the mechanics, if you have any questions on that, and possibly we can take a look at sample ballots that will come up and show you some results of a sample proportional representation election. So thank you very much, and am I handing over? Yes.
Nice job. Good evening. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Can you hear me way back there? Yeah? Back there as well? Thank you very much. My name is Michael Gallagher. Mayor Samaras and members of the council, Manager Donahue, Madam Solicitor, thank you for putting this together, and your team did a great job. Registrar Deeds of Dick Howe, distinguished panel members, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me. This is what happens when you write an op-ed piece. You end up doing this kind of thing. But thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for joining us, really. I mean, there's a lot of other things. Isn't it Monday Night Football tonight? You could be doing that tonight. Those of you who are watching TV, those of you who are patiently sitting through this here today, as interesting it is, I thank you very much for participating in the process. As former Vice President Biden, you remember this, whispered to former President Obama after the signing of the Affordable Care Act, this is a big bleeping deal. This is indeed a big deal. It's a big deal because as a result of this settlement, the way we carry out one of our most precious rights, the right to vote, is going to change. Is going to change for the first time in almost 60 years. Mr. Fain just did a great job presenting the RCV option. I sincerely, as a citizen here, I sincerely applaud his efforts at Voter Choice Massachusetts and very much respect his experience and pedigree in his field. I have to confess, I have none of that pedigree in support of the A3 neighborhood at-large option, but for what it's worth, and I see many candidates in the audience here today, I have this, an abiding belief that whenever more Lowellians become active in their communities, serving on boards or getting involved with political campaigns or running for political office or simply participating in forums like this, Lowell's future brightens. In this regard, if you'll forgive me, a quick, very quick personal anecdote. After I completed the 8th grade over at the Moody School, remember the Moody School on Rogers Street? I hoped to attend Lowell High School with my friends. My mother, though, had gone to Emmanuel College, and so she wanted me to have a Catholic high school education. And as you might expect, my mother won. And so I ended up at a Jesuit school, where I spent the bloom of my youth studying ancient Greek and Latin, dead languages. In spite of myself, though, I did learn a few things. And one of them was that maybe the most prolific era in recorded Western history was what? 5th century BC ancient Greece. The flowering of poetry and art, architecture, medicine, and democratic government. Importantly, the then Greek leader Pericles whose bust is just up the street at the mayor's reception room at City Hall, attributed much of the burst of creative energy to this: opening up the city of Athens to greater involvement from its own citizens and to other cultures throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. On an admittedly different scale, but by analogy, this is the promise. This is the promise that this new neighborhood electoral option holds, opening up the city of Lowell to even greater involvement from its residents, from all neighborhoods, and from all backgrounds. I would respectfully submit then that the 8-3 hybrid option is a low response to a low opportunity. Just over a month ago, I made the mistake. I don't want to say that. I wrote an op-ed piece in the Lowell Sun. What was especially interesting to me, though, was the variety and range of co-signers to this piece. A former congresswoman, leaders in the Southeast Asian, Portuguese, African, and Spanish communities. Neighborhood leaders, nonprofit leaders, those on the political left and those on the political right. And importantly, you all remember the hotly contested Lowell High School issue? We had leaders on both the downtown side, Brian Martin and Nancy Donahue, and on the Colley side, Kim Scott and Jack Mitchell. And so the question is really begged. Why do so many Lowellians from all sides of the community back this 8-3 option? Focusing for ease on discussion on just the council side of this issue, and you'll excuse me, Ms. Doherty, just the council side of the issue, allows me to offer what I hope you'll agree are some commonsensical reasons to support the 8-3 option. First, increased neighborhood participation. The proposed 8-3 option would ensure that all the major historic neighborhoods in the city would be represented on the council. Here are our current neighborhoods, right? We had a little bit of a game about this. A number of those neighborhoods have had very little presence on the council over the last few decades. If you look over in the far right, South Lowell, when's the last time South Lowell had a representative? With all due respect, it's not when PR was, it was Patrick Murphy. But that was only for his first term, because then he moved over to the Highlands. Well, close enough. So, he lived in the Grove. Well, even there, he lived in the Grove, not South Lowell. How about the Acre over there in the middle? We have a candidate from the Acre here tonight, Dave Willett. When's the last time we had a city councilor from the Acre? Tarsi Poulias. In the 1900s. The last time we had a representative from the Acre was in the last century. How about Centralville? Well, we have Karen. But if you go back 50 years, and we tried to do this, Dick Howe is going to correct me if I'm wrong, but over the last 50 years, I believe that you can count on one hand the number of councilors from Centralville. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, no matter how industrious and well-intentioned a councilor is, no one knows more about a neighborhood, right, Dave? No one knows more about a neighborhood than folks who live in that neighborhood. The 8-3 option would mean that 8 districts, however they're ultimately determined, would each have a councilor. Reason number 2, increased ethnic participation. The hybrid neighborhood at-large system increases the likelihood of a minority resident having a more realistic prospect of getting elected. Remember when Lowell won the All-American City competition in 1999? I think Eileen was on that plane. Everyone on that plane, all of the Lowell delegates, Ratha Yum was there too. We wore T-shirts, right? And the T-shirt said, Lowell, Mass, City of Immigrants. Lowell, Mass, City of Immigrants. Lowell takes great pride in its historic roots and much values its diversity. and it's a considerably richer city because of that diversity. And yet, while the city's Asian American and Hispanic Latino communities constitute over there on the right-hand side, this was from the 2010 census, almost 40%, and today more than 40% of the citizens. In our history, 183 years, but even going back just 50 years or so, a total of 2 Asian American counselors, right? And 1 Hispanic counselor. Now, this map here, with all due respect to my friend Mr. Fain again, this map was drawn by a very knowledgeable group of folks locally based upon census blocks from 2010. Take a look at that, those of you who live in this city, which I assume is almost all or all. That's almost exactly the neighborhoods we have today. Our view is that this is the way the map, something like this is the way the map would be drawn. It's one example of the 8 districts into which the city could be divided if we go the route. And as you can see, not only does it closely track our existing neighborhoods, but it would create at least two majority-minority districts, providing for much greater opportunity for meaningful minority participation in our governments. Reason number 3, increased citizen participation. We believe, based upon what we've been hearing in the area, there's every reason to believe that moving to a hybrid neighborhood at-large system would promote greater citizen involvement in the civic life of this city. Across the community, we've heard genuine excitement about this option. Potential candidates intimidated by the prospect. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to folks in this city who want to run for office, but they tell me, you're going to knock on 5,000 doors. How can you possibly do that kind of thing? But folks who are intimidated by that prospect, if they're running in a much smaller turf, a shrunken turf is what the political experts say, you're going to have a much more greater desire and hope for getting elected. Parts of the city, listen to this, parts of the city which may not typically see much campaigning during election season because they may not be as voter rich as other sections, should see intensified candidate activity. And this is the thing that we find so much with groups like Lowell Votes and others. My vote doesn't matter. My participation doesn't matter. Folks who may sit on the sidelines, historically who may have sat on the sidelines, will now feel that their involvement may matter and for once finally get involved in some way. Take a look at this survey. Back in August, Lowell Votes, CBA, and the CMAA did a survey. With the city's help, they had a number of community meetings. And they took a survey. What do you think about these options? The option results were as follows. Only 5% were supportive of ranked choice. The most popular option by far is the middle one, 8-3. The 3 hybrid options amounted to 69%, almost 70% of the respondents who attended those meetings supported the hybrid options. Reason number 4. As Howard said, it's worked elsewhere. You look at every major city in the Commonwealth, except for Cambridge. Every major city has a hybrid option. Boston with 9-4, Worcester with 5-6, Springfield with 8-5, Brockton 7-4, and New Bedford 6-5. I asked someone today, I was at a bank meeting in Boston today, a very prominent Bostonian who is as involved as anyone. You know, there's some talk about how district councilors, all they do is care about that district. She said, that's baloney. She said, the wonderful thing is, for the first time, those who live in the districts have the chance to walk just down the street and say hello to their district counselor and get some feedback right away. Reason number 5, and this is the final one. It's simple. It's a very simple process. This is an exemplar ballot from Worcester. Our friend Nico is from Worcester. And this is all you would do if we went to 8-3. You'd go into the ballot box, and on one side, you'd cast one vote for your district counselor. You then go to the other side, and you'd cast up to 3 votes for your at-large counselors. That's it. No seminars, no tutorials, no videos, no 3. This past week, the law department submitted a 3-page memo to the city councilors and the manager explaining how RCV was to be tabulated. You don't need any memos for this option. This is the ballot. So, in sum, in my opinion, I say very respectfully to you, there are lots of good reasons to select the neighborhood at-large option. But listen for 1 sec to the opinion of a real expert, one of the leading experts on fair voting in Massachusetts, a fellow all the folks up here probably know, and some of you know, George Pillsbury. He says neighborhood-based elections like 8-3 make it easier for both voters and candidates. Voters are more likely to meet the candidates in person and have access after the election to a neighborhood-based candidate. For candidates, the campaigns cost less. More time is spent closer to home, and there's more chance to meet people they seek to represent. And one last thing. For RCV, this was really interesting to me. For RCV, one of the 2 counting methods under consideration here in Lowell is the so-called Cincinnati method. The Cincinnati method for tabulating the votes under RCV is what Cambridge used. But the city of Cincinnati abandoned ranked choice in 1955. And literally today, this month, they're exploring changing to a hybrid system like 8-3. Just 3 weeks ago, in mid-September, here's what the proponents in Cincinnati said. We're doing this because we need change, and creating districts provides an opportunity for better representation in terms of geography and diversity, while also improving political debate, accountability, and voter engagement. That's the Cincinnati Enquirer, September 19th, 2019. May I suggest to you respectfully that the hopefully commonsensical reasons outlined earlier, the just quoted expert opinion, and the historical trend of communities moving toward hybrid systems begs the real question, why not 8-3 neighborhood at-large option? Thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Everybody. Yeah, I'm going to limit my presentation as much as possible because I can't hardly follow that presentation. Again, as previously introduced, my name is Tanya Ford. I'm the director of the Cambridge Election Commission. However, my husband of 4 weeks here in the audience made it clear that it's Ford Crump. So I apologize. Yeah. So I'm going to go over a little bit of the history of Cambridge and the method used by the city of Cambridge. So on June 1st, 1938, Massachusetts Governor Charles Hurley signed a bill adding a 5th charter form to the 4 plans already available. Modeled after a charter successful in Cincinnati, Plan E provided for a city manager form of government with proportional representation or ranked choice elections. Plan E was defeated in 1938, but adopted by voters in Cambridge in 1940, with the first PR election being held in 1941. Proportional representation, the Cincinnati method, is the method by which voters in Cambridge elect members of city council and school committee. It ensures minority representation with majority control. In Cambridge, any group of voters that number more than 1/10 of the votes cast can be sure of electing at least one member of a 9-member council. But a majority group of voters can be sure of electing a majority of the council. In a PR election, you may vote for as many candidates listed on the ballot as you wish, but you must rank the candidates in order of preference. Under PR, a candidate needs to win a certain proportion of votes to be elected. This winning fraction of votes is referred to as the quota. Any candidates who reach the necessary quota with number 1 votes are declared elected. This is done on election night and is known as the first count. The count continues with elimination of those candidates receiving fewer than 50 votes in the first count. The ballots are distributed to the other candidates according to the next preference marked. After each distribution, the candidate now having the lowest number of votes is eliminated, and his or her ballots distributed to the next indicated preference, number 2, 3, 4, etc. As candidates reach the quota through the addition of ballots to their total, they are declared elected and no further ballots are transferred to them. This process continues until all candidates have been eliminated except the 9 winners for City Council and the 6 winners for School Committee. The official first count of number ones, is available on election night. Unofficial because it does not include write-in ballots marked in a way that could not be read by scanners, overseas absentee ballots or provisional ballots, which are counted 10 days later. Once they have been counted, we have the official first count, and surplus is distributed, eliminating candidates with the least number of votes. My office currently employs 10 people, staff employees, including 2 to 3 temps. On election day, we increase that to 15, and election night, it increases to 30 due to our type of election system. Some of the pros and cons some of advocates and opponents have mentioned. PR advocates feel the system guarantees majority rule and at the same time gives minority groups representation in proportion to their actual strength. Opponents have expressed concerns about exciting groups' prejudices and makes voting a lottery. They also said the plan would be too expensive. In 2017, Cambridge purchased new vote tabulators. The new equipment and development of PR firmware cost $332,900. The voting equipment and original firmware was originally approved and certified by the Secretary of State's office. The PR firmware developed for Cambridge by our vendor also had to go through the same process of certification. In addition to certification, we are required to submit security documentation. This security profile was approved only days ago, and that this entire process went on for 2 years. It took 2 years to have all of this approved. These are things that, in changing a system, should be considered. It would be useful to investigate the overall effect such as a change would have on Lowell's current and future voting system. Voting machines, software costs, consultants, vendors, and procedures. That concludes my presentation.
Good evening. My name is Nico Vangelli. I'm the Assistant City Clerk for the City of Worcester, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. Okay, let me try that. Okay, can everybody hear me? All right, good evening. My name is Nico Vangelli. I am the Assistant City Clerk for the City of Worcester, and I want to thank everyone for inviting me this evening so I can provide you a quick overview of the election systems in Worcester. As everybody's mentioned this evening, we are a council-based system at large as well as district council. So we have 6 at-large city councilors, and then we have 5 district city councilors. When it comes to basically, electing the district city councilors, we have divided the city into 5 districts, and the division of those districts is done by the Board of Election Commissioners. So every 10 years when we conduct our federal census, we take the data and we divide the districts based on similar proportions. So we have District 1 that has the same number of residents in those 2 wards as District 5 and so on. So that responsibility falls upon the Board of Election Commissioners. And the board basically, as I mentioned earlier, takes the data from our federal census, divides the precincts as well as the wards into similar numbers of residents as well as registered voters. The board itself is made up of 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 1 unenrolled member. So basically, once they separate, the precincts and they separate the districts, then from there, we are electing our city councilors based on those districts. We also want to point out that in order to run for a district office, you do have to collect less signatures than you're running for at large. So one of our nomination processes is started in March. Running for a district requires 100 signatures to get on the ballot, while for at-large city councilor, you need about 300 certified signatures. So that's one leeway that the district councilors do have. In order to access the ballot, they actually have to collect less signatures. Another point I want to make is that when it comes to running on election day, you are dealing with less voters. So for the city of Worcester, we have about 100,000 registered voters. When you're running on election day, you're only representing about 20 to 25,000, depending how we separate those districts. So you are dealing with less voters. When it comes to the city councilor's responsibilities in the city of Worcester, usually the first call that comes from the resident is to the district councilor, and this is what we've been reporting. I do work in the clerk's office, and we do oversee their operations as well. So usually the first call, if it's snow removal, sidewalk repair, usually comes to the district council, so they do have a little more hands-on when it comes to the community. We also see a lot of the district councilors attend community meetings, and they represent neighborhood associations, so they do play a little more hands-on role on when it comes to neighborhood involvement. Depending on where you're elected from the city, as I said, we have 5 districts. Some districts tend to be, higher turnout than some other ones, especially inner city districts. We do feel that, those districts do have a less turnout when it comes to election day. So basically, that is the Worcester motto. We have 5 districts. We do have 6 city councils at large, and from those 6 city councils at large, we do elect a mayor. So basically, in order to become mayor in Worcester, you have to, win the mayor's race as well as one of those seats on the at-large city councilors. So that's basically what I have in terms to present. I open it up for questions so we can get right to it, because I know we're running a little late.
Okay, great. I bet you have a lot of questions, and we're going to come around the room with the mics, and then I'll hand this mic to the person who's the most obvious person to answer it. Yes.
Hi, good evening. Cheryl Clyburn Crawford. I'm the Executive Director of Mass Vote in Boston. My question is around sir, showed a specimen ballot. Is that the actual ballot? I'm curious about the language the ballot will hold regarding the 2 options. Will it say choose one of the 2, or is the language, do you like either one, yes, no, yes, no?
That's actually a question probably for you to go back to the slide that you have, because you're talking about the referendum, right? This election day, yes. Yes, we have that slide right here.
So Elliot will bring up that slide, but perhaps while he's doing that, we could take another question. Oh, actually, he's very fast.
There it is there.
So with respect to this question, Again, whatever your option is, it would be a yes vote for the option that you choose and a no vote for the one that you're rejecting. And this will be available online. Also, if anybody has any questions, you can call the law department, you can call the election office, and we would do our best to answer those questions.
My name is Paul Ratayam, and I live in the acre, not too far from here. My family and I came from Cambodia about 30 years ago, and we are involved in the community. Our children are born here and raised here and attend the public school here. I grew up in a family where we believe to give back to the community where we live. So every election, we all try to go out to vote of a candidate of our choice. And after a while, my fellow countrymen feel discouraged because they don't think that their vote will make no difference. Because 9 city council, 9 of them from the Belvedere, where the vote rich, control the voting. So I tried to prove them wrong. So I put my name on the ballot. And I spent, my wife and I, we knock on doors in 2015 in the Belvedere for 3 months. My wife and I knock on doors because, like every candidate, we know that's a rich vote neighborhood. So we went and knocked on doors, and then the rest of the neighborhood thereafter. So I did not get elected, of course, because my name is Yem, Y-E-M. You know, it's always on the bottom of the ballot, alphabetical orders. And then my name is new. It's not McDonald or O'Connell. So therefore, I tried again. I asked my wife, give me another chance, 2017, which I did. And it was a really turbulent time in 2017 due to the high school. One to keep the high school downtown. And I have 2 sons that's going to be in high school this year. So I vote for a new school. Of course, the downtown win because the majority of the people from Belvedere favor keeping the high school downtown. So I like the hybrid system because Mr. Gallagher mentioned that in the acres, only one candidate was represent the neighborhood. So Dave Ouellette, he's also from the acre. So if we have neighborhood representation, that would be great because we lived there for 30 years, so we know all the neighbors, the issues. And I appreciate what Mr. Gallagher spearhead, and I support the hybrid 8-3. Thank you so much for all the work.
Just a quick reminder that it's really intended to be more of a question period. Anyway.
Well, I have a few questions. One for PR. What is the method of computing the transfer votes that are over and above the threshold?
Hello? Yes? Okay. As came before the City Council, it was noted that that wasn't specified exactly. But there is a standard in the question, I'm sorry, was about the method of counting under the proportional representation system. And it is what's a precise method of transferring surplus votes when someone gets more than enough to win one seat. They're so popular, no one has to worry. I don't want to vote for them, they've got enough. If they have what's called surplus value, all of their ballots are reviewed, every single one. Who is the second choice of those voters listed on all those ballots, and an exact proportional amount of votes are transferred to those second choices.
Okay. That's not my understanding. My understanding is one of 2 methods, that being one of them, and the other one being, calculating every nth using every nth ballot. And I think Cambridge uses the nth ballot
Yes.
method.
They do. That is still in their charter. They haven't opened up their charter to review this in all these years. In fact, there was another city that used it and used a precise mathematical fractional way of figuring out where the second choices were going during the hand counts as well. Cambridge is the standard that would be used for any adoption, especially in a computer age, will be this precision method of fractional vote values based on a review of all ballots. If that didn't go into the consent decree, it's still almost unfathomable to imagine that adopting this, someone would go, the city would choose to go way back to something that can be improved on readily.
Okay.
And I just want to quickly say about the Cincinnati method, which was one method and adopted in 1941. Cincinnati no longer uses that. I met Ted Berry. He was one of 2 African Americans elected in the system under proportional representation. I met him in his late 80s, in about 1992. And that system, if it wasn't pleasant, the repeal of PR in Lowell, it was downright awful and ugly. What happened is Mr. Berry looked like he was going to be the number 1 vote getter, and there was a tradition that the number 1 vote getter would become the mayor of that city. That's why there's no PR after 32 years and numerous All-American City Awards in the city of Cincinnati and inclusion of that population, the entire population. That's why it was repealed and immediately went to a 9 at large, and everything changed after that. So I just wanted to add that. PR works to represent the majority, the minority in fair proportion to the votes that will win. It's unfathomable to me to say that what Cambridge has chosen not to open their charter on, even after they're computerized, is going to influence anything when there's such available methods that are the default assumption of how PR works best, and that is that method.
I have a question on E3. In the districts, when you create the districts, I assume it's the number of residents that determine the district, not the number of registered voters, nor the number of aged voters, voting age people.
I would defer to the city solicitor on that, but is it registered voters or population? Population.
Okay, it's population. So you could have a fairly low density vote. One concern I have with A3, which I think I favor, but the one concern I have is it tends to lead to, I think it's an incentive to give geographic segregation. That if there's 2 districts, then we put all the minority candidates living in those 2 districts, and I don't think that's a good idea.
I'd like to turn to our friend in Worcester. Maybe he has a response to that.
To the residents. So basically, in Worcester, we do have minority district councilors that have come on board on the council. They do tend to be from those districts that have high minority populations, so you are correct. But over the years, that has changed because we have neighborhoods that are growing every day, and those demographics are changing. So that's what I can respond right now.
When you draw the districts, do you pay attention to where the minority population is? And did I understand you that the election commission actually draws them?
That is correct. So basically, the Board of Election Commissioners uses the census data from the federal census, and once it's reported, and then they basically, use that population number to select certain wards and certain precincts. It hasn't changed in a long time. It might change, a few streets here and there, but it hasn't been, a total reconfiguration of all the precincts. Basically, if the downtown area is developing, we might, kind of shift certain streets from that precinct and add it to another precinct in order to make up kind of a balance of those districts.
Question over here.
What happens when you make the changes? If you go in the past, the Irish, the Greeks, the French ran these areas and they divided out and moved out and got divided so they're not predominantly the same. And Asians are starting to move out now. What happens to A3 and the other process? Is it still going to work?
I think the question is, if you're drawing districts and the population shifts, what happens? Of course, you redraw the districts every 10 years when the census comes out. So although they don't change within that 10-year period, at the end of the 10-year period with the new census, you have new districts. I don't know if you want to.
I think the question also involves, does it work in the sense of accomplishing what the change in the election system was intended to accomplish?
There's also, if I may, and again, this is based upon the consent decree, a lot of thought went into, with the plaintiffs and the city council and the manager, how they were going to do that. And so the census, of course, is next year, and the plaintiffs themselves will participate in the effort to make sure that the division of the districts is as well drawn and as fair as possible. And the community can get involved in that as well. The community's been involved in this process over the last number of months. It's not just going to be arbitrarily drawn. No one here is going to draw those districts. According to the consent decree, a bona fide expert, not Lisa, I understand, but a bona fide expert is going to come in, get the benefit of information from the elected leaders and from the plaintiffs, minority groups in this community, and then divide up the districts as fairly, as squarely as possible under the oversight of the federal judge. So this is not going to be a willy-nilly kind of process. It's going to be a very involved process into which folks can provide input and feedback over the next number of months. Hopefully, they'll be drawn by sometime maybe next summer or so, I guess the calendar might be, so that candidates can get some sense going into the next election, the 2021 election, for where their district will be. But I do believe that the intent is to draw districts as close to our historic neighborhoods as possible, and certainly, as you say, communities of interest as well.
I think Howard wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think I heard the question about each system, and that is, the demographics, people do change. That's when I focused on the historical, the Irish, the French, the Polish, the Greeks, and the Yankees. It has obviously changed, and with PR, if it's changing year by year, month by month, decade by decade, you never have to district on who you think might win one district, how to pack, how to crack. It's simply let the voters, packing and cracking into districts, because things are shifting. That is the story of American cities. Today's Asian and Hispanic and African American and Portuguese and Brazilian and others are the same in essence as before under the PR years. It's who's votes for whom, and you win seats based on the votes you win in fair proportion. And that never, and so there's no districting ever, except for voters creating their own districts. That's one of the attractions of the PR system.
I have a question over here. Good evening, everyone. This is a follow-up question with the gentleman that asked before about the drawing of the districts and how's it going to be made based on registered voters or the residents in the area. And one thing that I noticed working throughout the community is that not everybody is registered to vote. So if you get to identify a highly populated minority community, but not all of them are able to vote, would you be able to reshift the drawing of the distribution, or it will be just done that way and then their representation will still be the same way as before?
Although you draw the districts based on total population, the consent decree and the plaintiffs will make sure that the minority districts are not just minority total population. They'll be majority minority on the basis of citizen voting age population. So these are people who are, if they're not registered, at least eligible to register to vote. so that you're accounting for the possibility of people not being able to register to vote. It doesn't account for people not actually voting who are eligible to vote, but it will account for people who could register and vote.
So I have a question to the Cambridge representative. So the 33 extra staff for your polling locations, is that for people working at the office, or is that working for the polls, at the individual polls?
Neither. The employees working on election evening are at the tabulation center.
Okay.
So we have 15 or more employees working in the office during the day, which will include several temps that we hire for that day. And then when we go to the tabulation center, some of the poll workers at the end of the evening, when they close their polls, they come over and they help us with the count.
What happens if, you guys probably don't have this problem. Oh, I hope you don't have this problem. What happens if you don't have get to the amount of people you need? What happens if you're understaffed?
We just work longer hours.
Okay. My big worry is that for the city of Lowell, every election we are utterly understaffed, and that's not anyone's fault. It's just how it's a volunteer system. That's how it slices. So so we have 33 precincts. We have let's just say we have to get the wardens and the election staff to help with that. That is 36 people who may or may not be. I was a warden this year because of the fact that our previous warden called out at the last minute. So my big worry is that what happens if the staff, this is all staff that's last minute, where they didn't have the proper training. Because I know a few clerks that didn't have the proper training at the end of the day.
So are you referring to the polling locations or
Or
the
the
tabulation?
Tabulation.
Well, at the tabulation center, my staff normally assists showing people how to do the job that evening. Plus, our count also goes over to the second day. We don't do everything that first night. Only the first count, all those who were elected on the first count go on that night. Then we come back the next day and we do the count, the full count of unofficials.
So what happens if there's a recount?
Then if there's a recount, which we did have, and it lasted 2 weeks, we hire our poll workers usually. But I don't know, the poll workers here in Lowell paid?
Yes.
Okay.
They're paid $180 and $20 extra if they go to the training.
Okay.
And we still have a short staff.
Yeah, we are short of staff at times, you know. It's just that some of the poll workers will take up the slack for others. There is also opportunities where we can get other poll workers in on that day, people that have worked in the past that may be able to come in. Some people we've had drop out half day, you know, but we just make it work. And sometimes, there's been times where I had to send one of my staff over.
Okay. No further questions.
And, you know, as interim director of elections, I just want to point out that regardless of which system is chosen, staffing will, you know, remain a priority regardless of if it's either ranked choice or a hybrid system. Regardless of how polling setup is, the city remains committed to ensuring proper staffing and training as it is in our current system and moving forward.
A quickie question about ranked choice voting. It seems to me that there is an argument being made that supposedly ranked choice voting is incredibly complicated. And it's like, hold it, folks. I mean, let's simplify this down. Tell me if I'm wrong. But basically, what it boils down to is you can really vote for the person that you really like most and not worry about throwing your vote away. And then the second thing about the complication is, for God's sake, isn't this all done with a computer anyway? So it's like, you don't have to worry about the complications because the computer takes care of it. Am I correct at all?
You are correct on all of that. And if anyone can we have some help passing these out? We have some in other languages as well. Just a sample ballot, a mock ice cream ballot, just so you can see what a ballot looks like. It's very similar to the Cambridge with the columns. And so, yes, ranked choice voting is as easy as 1, 2, 3. You vote for who you want, why you want, in the order of preference. It is, the computerization has made a dramatic effect. I will say, I'm pretty sure that Cambridge could opt. What they're gathering at their site for is to pull the memory cards. The same as precinct machines are brought back to Lowell's City Hall, and the memory card from the AccuVotes is taken out. They can run that election from first choice and all the entire things in not even seconds, microseconds, of course. And one of the things about the fractional methods is that the recounts will be substantially easier. They don't rely on ballot order. So, in fact, I just want to clarify. You have AccuVotes in Lowell, and Cambridge, since computerization in 1997 used AccuVotes, those machines got very old. Your machines are very old. The Secretary of State is very clear that he wants all of them replaced soon. And the cost for the new machines, which are used for state and municipal elections, were not required for PR. They were using the AccuVotes and adapted the software for the export of the data. Absolutely. It's a very simple process. Voting is simple, 1, 2, 3. Calculation on the computer is instantaneous and simple.
Just to combat that microsecond of calculation, it's about 2 years to certify, is it?
2 years?
To certify that the firmware is correct?
First of all, federal certification has just come for Universal Tabulator from the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center that handles all things. Doesn't even have, good point, doesn't even have the Cincinnati method on it. It only has the fractional options. And that is a universal, open source, free, already certified by the feds.
This might be for you, but the setting of the districts and in making sure that they're properly minority represented. If you wait until the federal releases the census data, it's April of 2021. Are you able to start this process before that?
April 20, right? Okay, I'm sorry.
Could you repeat the question? No, Chris.
The federal release of the census data will be done in April of 2021. Can you start the process of designing the districts before you get that data? Because if you don't, you're going to be very close to people deciding whether they're going to run in a district or not.
So actually, under the consent decree, we have to start it before to do preliminary drawings.
You have something called the American Community Survey data that you'll probably be using to begin the drawing process. This is a sample survey. It's a rolling survey, and you will use that data to do the districts and then check them with the release of the census data.
We have a question here.
Is it required that a person running under the district method live in the district that they want to be elected to, and do they have to live in that district in order to get on the ballot, or can they wait until he or she wins before they start looking for a place to live?
Great question. So the way it's written in the Worcester's Charter is that you must reside in the district for 1 year prior to taking an election. So basically, you have to live in 1 year before being sworn in.
That's Worcester. I want Lowell. Who can answer for Lowell?
There's nothing in the consent decree, ma'am, about that, but recently I understand the council took a vote requiring exactly that you have to live for a year before.
Yeah, that's correct. And also I will say, since that vote, it has been submitted to the federal court to amend the consent decree to include that requirement. The court hasn't actually ruled on it, but we don't anticipate that you have to live for a year before you can run in that district. If you do move during your term of office, you're allowed to continue your term of office, but then you wouldn't be eligible for re-election.
I want to know how in Worcester primaries are handled at both the district and at-large level.
Great question. So basically, we have, anytime there's a preliminary triggered, we have to have double the number of candidates. So because we only elect one for district, we have to have 3 candidates in order to have a preliminary in district. And we've had elections where we've only had district races and not at large. For example, in 2017, I had 2 district races. I had a District 1 and District 5. One race had 3, the other had 4 candidates. We brought it down to 2 for November, and then one of the candidates was elected. That is correct. So in at large, you can vote up to 6 on the ballot. In the September preliminary just a few weeks ago, we had 15 candidates. We brought it back to 12. And then you vote for 6 finalists in order to move on to be sworn in January.
Hi. My name is Dominic Lay. I am a current school committee member. I have a question for the gentleman from Worcester and the lady from Cambridge. Do you know how long it took before a minority candidate got elected to the office after the election changed, that the election system changed?
So in Worcester's case, I don't recall because I've only been an election official in Worcester for about 7 years now. I know that when I first came into the role, we did have minority candidates on the council, and I believe we changed in 1987. And we have a pretty diverse council going back to the early 2000s as well. But I don't have that data, unfortunately, at the top of my head.
Neither do I, unfortunately. This was, the voters adopted this back in 1940. I've been here nine years, so I'm not quite sure when exactly that did happen. I could get that information and provide it to the city.
Why I ask is because I feel like I am sitting here at a 8-3 rally, and I feel that if you didn't even change the law, I mean the voting system, I wonder whether this minority candidate got elected anyway. Whether the lawsuit, I mean the system, make any difference at all. That's one of my comments.
Well,
and I feel that I am a minority candidate and a member of the Lowell School Committee, but I just feel that this change does not help a minority community. I feel it does the opposite way. And, well, I better speak now or, and for ranked choice, I like to see the mathematical formula, because the way you describe it, sometimes it could be interpreted differently. So if you have it in the math formula, maybe that's more consistently. And Mr. Ouellette, Dave, he's from the Acre, and so if he got elected this year, then it's proven that we don't need an 8-3 system change. He could just run citywide and still get elected from the Acres. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak.
If I may, on the Worcester and Cambridge data, I do have the Worcester. It was, as I mentioned previously, it came in 1987, but it wasn't until 2011 before a minority filled one of the district seats. The first at large, there was 10 years later, 1997. So that's the answer on that. As for, may I do this? Yep. And by the way, Worcester was a city just like Lowell that used proportional representation around the same time, had the same experience, and the same circumstances under its repeal. I just want to add, it used a precision math method called the Boulder method. There are other cities at the time, even way before computerization. This is the ice cream. You all got your ballots. You saw that you could just rank your choices 1, 2, 3 in the appropriate columns, a Cambridge-style ballot of the columns. And the this is round 1, mint chocolate chip, and I hope you all had a flavor that will get taken care of pretty well under this election to elect 3 favorite flavors. Not a majority domination, but everyone getting a fair choice to be represented in their flavor selection. The threshold is established. It looks like it's 7 based on the number of votes. That this was an actual election ran with these ballots, and 27 votes, and one popular flavor clears the threshold, and the surplus will be distributed. One of the things, since we were advised against doing online here, is, and we go to round 2, that every one of those ballots is reviewed, and then based on how often you appear as second choice, you receive that vote value at that transfer value. And coffee received 1.2 votes. If you looked at the others, there would be a different fractional, sometimes less than 1, and those become part of your total. Next slide shows that there was actually a surplus of coffee. They got enough votes to clear the threshold. That same process happens in this method that I expect Lowell will use, that will give those surplus at smaller fractional values to, after reviewing all of coffee's second choice, and they go, and you can see that the tally is being adjusted. By round 4, that surplus is accounted for. There's 2 winners. We're waiting for the third. The lowest vote candidate is eliminated. That's chocolate. Not surprisingly, chocolate was heavily favored. Their second choice went mostly to chocolate peanut butter and a bit to strawberry, and again at those values. And at that point, still no winner. There's neck and neck for cherry vanilla. You eliminate strawberry. The fruit ice cream, strawberry went to cherry vanilla, another one, and no surprise there, and it passes. And we have 3 flavors elected under this system, and that's the method. You review all the ballots when someone clears the threshold, and you assign in exact mathematical precision the vote values to the second or later choices that are on those ballots. I hope everyone got an ice cream selected. That's good for you.
Thank you. I have a question with the districting method. I know it's based on the consent decree, which my understanding was minorities in the consent decree were defined as Latino and Asians. So does that mean when you're looking at the majority-minority districts, you'll be focusing on those 2 minority groups, Latinos and Asians living in the city? Other minority groups won't be factored in, correct? More or less. Okay, so then if you could comment on how that works in a city where you have Latino populations spread across the city. I mean, I think many of our Asian families do live in certain neighborhoods, and so would you have any comment on that in terms of our other minority groups and how they would be represented in the district system?
The reason that they succeeded in winning this, in convincing the court that they would win this suit, is because Asian Americans and Hispanics often prefer the same candidates. So presumably Hispanics wouldn't have to be a majority of a district. There would just have to be a strong plurality of a district along with Asian Americans and be able to elect their candidates of choice. An actual analysis of voting patterns was conducted to determine this, and it was shown through the statistical analysis that they favored the same candidates.
I think that's unusual, especially if you had one that's Asian and one that's Hispanic. competing in the same district. But just my follow-up question has to do with something that was mentioned from the Worcester representative about when you would have to have a primary. And I know he gave us a great example of how that works in Worcester. What would trigger primaries in Lowell, and would it be based district by district as well as at large? So you have, with 8 districts and 3 at large, is that 9 opportunities for having a trigger for a primary? How would that play out in Lowell?
If I may jump in, for the Worcester's case, the charter says you have to have more than double the candidates. So if we have 6 at-large city councilors, we have to have 13 candidates in order to have a preliminary. For district, it says more than double the candidates. So if you have 3 candidates running for a district seat, that would trigger preliminary. I don't know how they will recommend it was.
Currently, that is the same requirement in Lowell. So the way it would work is if you had a district with 1 seat, if you had 3 candidates, that would trigger a preliminary in that. Same thing with at-large. If there are 3 at-large seats, if you have double plus 1, that would trigger it as well.
And I'll just add that under the consent decree, if ranked choice is selected, it's at the council's discretion whether or not to hold a preliminary, or at the city's discretion. If districts are selected, we would use the N+1 for the next 2 election cycles, and at that time the opportunity would be there to review it, see if we still want to have a preliminary if there are 3 candidates, say, in the district, and go from there.
So one last question. We have one down here, if you want to.
In each district, so if 3 people run, that's just, I'm from South Lowell. No one runs up there. I'm running up and out of South Lowell, and I think past Councilor Fleming was the only one that stuck around in South Lowell. Anyways, Attorney Gallagher.
He's actually from Grove, I think.
Bowden Street, if I'm not mistaken, right up top, which is my street. Exactly. So in each district, if there's 3 people running out of South Lowell, only that district will have a preliminary. Is that what I'm understanding? And that would go on for every district?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay. Well, we first of all, thank you all for being here tonight. This has thank you for taking the time out. As has been said, this is a very, very important question for the city of Lowell, and the more information you get, the better. I want to thank each and every panelist, our moderator tonight. Let's have a big hand for them. You brought a lot of information, shed a lot of light on 2 different systems, and systems that we will be talking a lot about both before and after the next election. So let me just add that the City of Lowell, we're doing outreach. This is one of our outreaches, obviously, LTC. Thank you, LTC, for your filming of this, and you will be replaying this so others can see it during this next month. And then I did want people to know we will be doing a direct mailer to every registered voter in the City of Lowell, so that they will have an explanation of these choices. They will see the ballot questions. We've had a lot of inquiries about when people can look at what the ballot question is going to look like before they go to the voting booth. And we will also include the 3rd ballot question, which is the Community Preservation Act. So look for that probably sometime in mid-October. Every household will be getting, every voting registered voter. So we're doing all we can so people can know as much about this choice, and the mailer will also tell you where to go to get more information in terms of our website. Your Lowell, your vote, we constantly update that and put more information if anybody has questions. And as has been said, please feel free to call the law department, call the election commission, you can call my office, and so thank you very much. I did want to thank the counselors who were here, again, Mayor Samaras, Councilor Vesna Noon, I don't think we introduced you, the Vice Mayor of the City of Lowell. And Councilor Dave Conway was here as well. So thank you so much to everybody, and we look forward to continuing this discussion. Thank you very much.